If the person you loved risked prison to save you, but never told you, would you forgive them? Comment your answer and subscribe now. It began on a night built for kings, where billionaires raised champagne glasses not to celebrate success, but to hide insecurity. The ballroom in Manhattan was cold, elegant, and overflowing with money disguised as confidence. And in the center of it all stood Mark Harry. 29-year-old black billionaire, navy blue suit sharp like a blade, posture carved from discipline, unveiling the boldest project of his career, Horizon 88, a vertical luxury city planned for Dubai. Tonight was supposed to be the night he proved himself, not as someone who inherited clever thinking from his father, but as a man who could outbuild every opponent in luxury real estate. The cameras flashed. Investors laughed polished fake laughs. Media whispered like snakes. Mark wasn't intimidated. He understood the room. Money equals war. Real estate equals blood sport. Reputation equals the only bulletproof vest. He scanned the room, reading faces the way other men read spreadsheets, and everything felt predictable until he saw her, a woman standing alone near the holographic projection of the Dubai Tower, eyes lost in quiet fascination. No forced smile, no desperate posing, no hunger for attention. Elegant black dress, minimal jewelry, wine glass held with controlled ease. She wasn't trying to be admired, which made her impossible to ignore. Mark slowed his steps without realizing it. This woman had presence, not performance. He moved closer, not out of impulse, but out of gravity. She spoke first. This skyline will make Dubai feel small. Her voice had the softness of danger, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Mark turned to her, and she turned to him with eyes that didn't flinch, didn't blush, didn't shrink. She recognized him instantly. Mark Harry, right? Not starstruck, not impressed, just aware. Most women who recognized him melted into performative shyness. This one didn't. This one talked to him like an equal. They spoke for nearly 40 minutes about cities, shapes, architecture, psychology of vertical luxury. No gossip, no brand bragging, no billionaire groupie energy. Just real thought, real intellect, real chemistry. And for the first time in years, Mark's guard slipped. For the first time in years, he forgot he was supposed to be untouchable. But then the keynote called him back to stage. He left reluctantly, and when he finished his speech, she was gone. It bothered him more than it should have. He glanced around, trying to pretend he wasn't looking, and then he saw it. A forgotten access badge on a cocktail table. He picked it up casually, turned it over, and everything changed. Elena Moretti. The surname hit him like a blade. Moretti, one of the oldest, most ruthless family empires in luxury global real estate. Moretti, the same dynasty that nearly destroyed Mark's father financially. Moretti, the reason Mark rejected legacy families and built Harry Global at lightning speed. He stared at the badge, pulse tightening, fully aware of the meaning. This woman wasn't just a dangerous distraction. She was the daughter of the enemy. And yet, he wanted to see her again. That is the moment the billionaire, who vowed never to fall, began falling. And he didn't even realize the drop had already started. Subscribe and comment your country if you're deep into this already. Where are you watching from? He tried to avoid her. He told himself Elena Moretti was a threat, a distraction, a beautifully packaged danger that could ruin everything he built. He repeated this truth in his mind like a mantra, but his heart wouldn't obey. For days after the Manhattan event, Mark Harry found himself replaying their conversation. The way she didn't flinch when she spoke to him, the way she spoke of skylines like they were living organisms instead of architecture. He could close billion-dollar deals without blinking, but he could not close the door on her memory. He held her forgotten access badge for a full week before deciding to return it. At least that's what he told himself. Truth was, he wanted an excuse. He walked into the silent private elevator of his penthouse, telling himself he was only going to hand the badge back and leave. No conversations, no dinner, no curiosity, just closure. But when the elevator doors opened, Elena was already there in the lobby, as though destiny refused to wait for him to make another rational decision. She wasn't dressed for a public event. She wore a soft cream sweater, dark jeans, no makeup, and somehow she looked even more dangerous without trying. She looked up, surprised and not scared. "I was hoping I'd run into you again, Mark." Her voice disarmed him all over again. Mark handed her the badge, expecting that to be the end. But then she tilted her head, studying him the way only a woman who wasn't intimidated could. "Do you ever take a break from being unapproachable?" Mark didn't laugh. Not because it wasn't funny, but because he felt that she saw through him in a way people rarely did. He swallowed the truth he didn't want to admit. She pierced his guard. And the next sentence came out his mouth too fast. "Dinner?" She smiled. "Where?" He hesitated, then made a decision that would define everything after. "Somewhere nobody will recognize us." And that's how the secret started. It wasn't loud. It wasn't performative. Their love was quiet, intense, hidden. Mark flew her to cities where billionaires didn't show off, places where paparazzi didn't camp. Not Paris, not London, not Dubai, Marrakesh, Montenegro, Doha, Santorini in the off-season. They sat in rooftop restaurants where no one cared who they were. He ordered food for her without asking, and she always trusted his choices. Sometimes they didn't speak for long minutes, just sat in silence watching distant skylines. He thought he knew intimacy before, but this was different. This wasn't desire. This wasn't lust. This was a soul collision. Mark told no one. His board didn't know. His closest senior advisor didn't know. His cousin, who knew every woman he ever texted, didn't know. And Elena? She told no one. She disappeared from her family publicly, only enough to make it believable she was traveling for research or market study. When she was with Mark, she wasn't a Moretti. She was just a woman in love. They would lay in hotel rooms with balconies overlooking quiet seas, and Elena would trace the shape of his hand with her fingers. Sometimes she asked simple questions. "Do you ever get tired of being watched?" Mark would answer, "I'm only tired when I feel invisible." And she understood. She understood the life of a man who could own everything, but never feel truly seen. It happened on a night in Montenegro. No paparazzi, no noise, no business talk. They walked barefoot on the terrace of a closed beach restaurant, holding hands like two normal humans, two souls without legacy, without dynasty. The moonlight reflected against the water, silver light across black waves, and Mark realized something he didn't want to admit. He wasn't afraid of Elena's last name anymore. He wasn't afraid of Moretti. He was afraid of losing her, and that was far more terrifying. One night, sitting in a quiet villa, Elena broke the unspoken rule they both silently agreed to. She talked about her father. She didn't mention details, but her eyes dropped. "If he ever found out who I love, it would become war, not business." Mark froze. Elena lifted her head slowly, and their eyes locked. The truth was exposed. They both knew who her father was. They both understood the industry battlefield between Moretti and Harry. And yet, they didn't stop. They held on to each other anyway. This wasn't romance. This was defiance. They were breaking the rules of dynasties with every kiss. It happened in Italy, Amalfi Coast, in a tiny villa outside Positano. After another quiet dinner, after another night of hiding from the world, Elena placed her wine glass down. She looked at him with a seriousness that didn't feel reckless, just inevitable. "Mark, I want to marry you. Tonight." Mark didn't breathe. For the first time, the world stopped around them. The ocean outside was silent. The lights flickered across the rocky coast. Time froze. She wasn't asking for attention. She wasn't asking for a ring. She was asking for war. And Mark knew it. Because this wasn't just marriage. This was choosing love over bloodline. Subscribe if you want to see what happens next. Comment if you think love is stronger than blood. There are weddings meant for cameras. And then there are weddings meant for the soul. Mark and Elena's wedding was the second type. No gold leaf invitations. No magazine covers. No celebrity guests. Just two people in love, fighting the world by choosing each other. Positano was quiet that night. The sea wind soft, the moonlight folding itself over the cliffs like a velvet blanket. The villa caretaker gave directions to a tiny old chapel, a place so hidden even some locals didn't know it existed. The building was small, ancient stone walls, wooden doors that looked like they had weathered 6 centuries of storms, and a single priest who had no idea that 2 of the most powerful bloodlines in global real estate were about to collide under his old roof. There were no wedding rings ready, no flowers, no professional suit styling. Mark still wore his navy blue suit from dinner. Elena wore the cream silk dress she had packed carelessly into her suitcase, never imagining she would be wearing it as a bride. But somehow it was perfect. The priest asked them simple vows, and their voices didn't tremble. They weren't children in love. They weren't intoxicated by fantasy. They were 2 brilliant minds, both aware that this decision could change the balance of an entire global industry. Mark looked at Elena, her eyes soft, steady, and for the first time in his life, he felt fear not of losing billions, but of losing her. This was the moment a truth broke inside him, a truth that could never be undone. Mark Harry was in love with the daughter of his enemy. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, they didn't kiss like fairy tale characters. They kissed like 2 people who knew they might have just declared war on their families, and still chose to do it anyway. Afterward, they walked out of the chapel and sat by the old stone wall that overlooked the entire coastline. The sea stretched endlessly ahead, black water shimmering under silver light, and it felt like the whole world paused. Mark held her hand, and for once, his mind wasn't calculating risk. He wasn't thinking about projects. He wasn't thinking about competition. He wasn't thinking about deals. He was thinking about her. Elena rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I know what we're risking. I know who I am, and I know who you are. But this is the only thing in my life that feels real." Mark closed his eyes. His world had always been logic, predictable, structured, strategic. But Elena was a variable that didn't follow any formula, the anomaly, the only equation he couldn't solve. And that's why he loved her. 3 days later, Mark returned to the United States alone. He had convinced Elena to fly separately. Anything else would be reckless. Their marriage had to remain invisible, at least for now. He stepped into his Manhattan office with a different soul. He was still the youngest billionaire in his sector. He was still the most dangerous disruptor in luxury property. But now, he was a married man, and the world didn't know yet. He placed his phone on the desk, refreshed his financial watch list, then opened the industry news feeds out of habit. The first headline froze him. Moretti Group moves to sabotage Harry Global's Dubai project. Everything inside him stopped. His blood cooled. His chest went hollow. Reality, the ugly version, crashed into him like a blade. He whispered to himself, "War has begun. Subscribe, because this is where the dynasty war begins." Comment if you think Elena is going to choose love or bloodline. The world never announces the moment war begins. There is no ceremonial countdown. One day, everything still feels like peace. And the next, peace dies. For Mark Harry, that moment arrived not with guns, but with a press release. The headline hit global finance media at 6:05 a.m. New York time. Moretti Group questions SEC compliance of Harry Global, calls for immediate investigation. And just like that, the gloves were off. Boardrooms start to behave differently when there is blood in the water. Directors get nervous. Investors get silent. Advisors suddenly ask for meetings that really shouldn't wait. And analysts on Wall Street start to use words like risk exposure and shareholder fragility. Mark walked into Harry Global's level 58 boardroom in Manhattan with a calm face. But inside his chest, a storm was forming. Some wars are fought with bullets. Billionaire wars are fought with whispers. He took his seat. His CFO, silver-haired ex-Goldman, non-emotional to the core, leaned in. "Mark, they're coming for you." Mark already knew. Moretti had fired the first public shot, and the world would now respond like sharks who smell blood. It became the most expensive silent war of the year. Moretti's legal team filed 7 different complaints in 14 days. Each complaint was structured with surgical precision, not to win, but to damage perception. Media picked it up within hours. Bloomberg, Reuters, Wall Street Journal. Global markets don't wait for facts. They react to threat. And Harry Global stock dipped. Not a crash, not a collapse, just a subtle downward bend, like a neck bowing to a greater power. Mark saw it and felt the pressure crack deeper inside his bones. This was personal. This wasn't competition. This was annihilation. Moretti wanted Harry Global destroyed, not debated. Elena watched everything unfold from the marble kitchen of their Manhattan penthouse, glass windows stretching across the skyline, and her heart was splitting into two unequal pieces. Blood or husband. She grew up hearing one constant thing at the dinner table. The Harrys are poison. Her father didn't say it as opinion. He said it as scripture. But now she was married into that very bloodline. Now she carried the Harry name. And every headline attacking Mark, every pundit smirking on TV, every analyst implying Harry Global was shady, felt like needles stabbing directly into her skin. She started to tremble inside, the kind of tremble a woman feels when the world she believed in starts to glitch. Her father wasn't just fighting Mark's company. He was trying to destroy her husband, psychologically, financially, and publicly. She began to realize, if her father had to choose between victory and his daughter's happiness, he would choose victory. And that revelation hurt more than anything she had ever experienced. Mark's days became warfare without sunlight, corporate war rooms, crisis PR sessions at midnight, lawyers arguing over every comma in every filing, private meetings in black SUVs in underground garages. His enemies now included countless invisible hands, hedge funds who shorted Harry Global stock, media columnists who wrote his disguise as analysis, regulators whispering quietly and unofficially. His senior advisor said it clearly. Mark, your reputation isn't being questioned. It is being burned. War in billion-dollar territory doesn't look like explosions. It looks like anxiety. It looks like emails with the subject line urgent, reputational risk. It looks like lawyers sleeping 3 hours per night. Mark felt the pressure, but what kept him steady wasn't adrenaline. It was Elena. Every night he came home, exhausted, and she would just place her hand on his shoulder silently. That hand became his oxygen. But inside Elena, the war was worse, because Mark was defending himself. But she was being forced to choose who she really belonged to. Then another article dropped, this one colder than the others. Harry Global CEO married secretly in Italy. Moretti daughter confirmed as bride. It wasn't supposed to go public. That wedding was sacred, hidden, protected, and suddenly the world began connecting dots, speculating, guessing, laughing. Twitter turned it into a circus. Romeo and Juliet for billionaires. CEO marries enemy's daughter in Positano. What is this, Netflix? Is Mark even stable? Humiliation became gasoline, and Moretti knew it. Anonymous sources began leaking insider info, implying Elena only married Mark for strategic intelligence. The story spun like wildfire. Mark and Elena's love, the only pure part of their life, became weaponized. Mark's fury grew into something primal, but he forced himself not to retaliate emotionally. He was a Harry. Harrys do not panic. Harrys do not break publicly. But inside, he was collapsing. Elena reached a breaking point. She watched her father demonize Mark, not with logic, but with performance. She sat in a dark room one night, in their penthouse, staring at the floor for over 40 minutes. Was she the reason her father escalated? Was her love the trigger that detonated this global war? She tried to speak. Couldn't. She attempted to eat. Stomach rejected food. She tried to sleep. Her mind screamed. A daughter shouldn't have to choose like this, between the man who raised her and the man she now belonged to. Tears finally came, quiet, slow, like broken glass melting. She sent no texts. She made no calls. She simply reached a moment where the weight became unendurable. And the next morning, she was gone. Mark arrived home that night. Lights off. Silence, so heavy it felt like a physical presence. Elena's closet door was open. Half her clothes were missing. Her phone was on the counter. Her wedding ring was not. No note, no explanation, no goodbye, just absence. He didn't panic at first. He just stood there, trying to breathe, telling himself, she just needed air. She'll call. But she didn't. He waited 2 hours. Then 6. Then 12. Nothing. Elena had vanished. Not kidnapped. Not chased. Not forced. She chose to disappear, and the reason was invisible. Love had not broken, but reality had. Elena is gone. Nobody knows where she is. If you're locked in, subscribe so you don't miss the next drop. Comment below with one word. Where? Where did she go? Where do you think Elena ran to? Manhattan felt colder without her. Not winter cold, but that quiet, private kind of cold that lives under your skin when someone you love disappears without saying why. For the first 3 days, Mark Harry didn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse office, staring at the skyline that once made him feel invincible. Now, every light across the glass towers looked like a silent question. Where did she go? He called her number. Disconnected. He sent messages. Unseen. He called every mutual contact, every assistant, every hotel where she might have checked in under an alias. Nothing. Elena Moretti had vanished like smoke, and the silence she left behind felt louder than any explosion. But billionaires don't stop at heartbreak. They investigate. They hunt. And Mark was built for both. He assigned 2 private security teams, not the kind with black suits and earpieces, but the kind with offshore accounts and no paper trail. Within 72 hours, they traced her to Europe, first to Geneva, then to Milan. Finally, Rome. Rome, the city of empires, the city where love stories turn into wars. One of his men sent a single encrypted message that shattered his last thread of calm. Target sighted. Hotel Eden. Meeting with Moretti Sr. scheduled tomorrow, 1400 hours. Mark froze. His pulse tightened. Every atom in his body screamed the same word. No. He wanted to believe she was there to protect him, to stop her father's attacks, to reason with the man who turned global business into blood sport. But another voice whispered the darker truth. Maybe she was there to negotiate the end of him, because in war, loyalty always has a price, and love, in his world, was never tax-free. The next morning, Mark boarded his jet. No assistance, no security, just silence. He sat by the window, staring at clouds, trying to breathe through the burn in his chest. By the time the plane touched down in Rome, the decision was already made. He would see her face. He would hear her voice. And then he would know. He arrived at the hotel before the meeting began. He didn't walk in through the front. He used a back service corridor and a staff elevator, habits of a man who had learned to live invisible in public. From a suite 2 floors above the meeting room, his team had already set up surveillance. No audio, just visuals. A camera feed flickered on the laptop screen. And there she was, Elena, perfect posture, composed. Across from her, Enzo Moretti, her father, a man whose smile had banqueted competitors. They were talking. Calm, civil, cold. Mark leaned closer, staring at the silent footage. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He saw her gesture. He saw the way she pushed the document across the table. He saw Enzo's smile curve into satisfaction. He saw his own name appear, faintly visible, on the folder's corner. And that was enough. Enough to destroy him. The man who had conquered global cities. The man who had negotiated with governments and outwitted billionaires twice his age. Now sat frozen, watching the woman he loved. The woman he married in secret. Hand his name to the man who wanted him dead. For 5 minutes, Mark didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. He just watched. And then he stood up, slowly, deliberately, a storm building behind his eyes. He didn't send anyone to intercept her. He didn't confront Enzo. He just walked out of the hotel like a man whose soul had been quietly shot through the chest. That night, Rome's streets glowed gold under the streetlights. Mark walked without direction, tie loose, hands in pockets, silence trailing behind him like a shadow. He wanted to be angry, but what he felt was worse. He felt betrayed by his own hope. When he finally returned to the penthouse in New York, it no longer felt like home. It felt like a museum. filled with memories that didn't belong to him anymore. Her wine glass still on the counter, her perfume still faint in the air, her sweater still hanging on the armrest. He sat on the edge of the couch, motionless. The city outside glittered like temptation. But Mark Harry wasn't tempted anymore. He replayed the footage over and over, each time convincing himself that he wasn't misreading it, that the betrayal was real. And with every replay, love turned into anger. Anger turned into armor. He called his legal counsel. Voice calm. Draft the separation agreement. Quiet. Private. I want it airtight. The lawyer hesitated. Sir, are you certain? Mark's eyes were flat, emotionless. Certainty is all I have left. Days turned into weeks. Headlines shifted from war to whispers. Harry Global stabilized under pressure. Mark's public image recovered, cold, unshaken, resilient. But behind that resilience was a man bleeding quietly. The world saw confidence. He saw ghosts. He stopped answering journalist calls. He stopped attending events. He stopped sleeping. At 3 a.m., he would stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights reflecting in his eyes, thinking about the chapel in Positano, the vow, the silence, the sea wind. He tried to hate her. He failed, because hate still needed connection, and Mark had nothing left but distance. One evening, his assistant entered the office, hesitant. Sir, there's a delivery for you. From Rome. Mark looked up slowly. A brown envelope. No sender. No logo. He opened it. Inside, photographs. Elena, in a meeting room, smiling faintly, next to her father, next to lawyers. The last photo showed her shaking Enzo's hand. Deal closed. Caption on the back, handwritten in pen. For survival, not for love. Mark read it twice. Then again, his vision blurred, not from tears, but from disbelief turning into something darker. He didn't know who sent it. He didn't care. All he knew was that the woman who once swore to protect him now seemed to be working with a man trying to bury him. That night, Mark did something he had never done before. He drove, no driver, no escort, to the only place where he could think clearly, his father's old house in upstate New York. It was quiet there. The air smelled of old wood and memory. His father's study still held the scent of cigars and unfinished battles. Mark stood in front of the same fireplace where his father once told him, "Trust is the rarest currency in business and the most dangerous in love." Now he understood. Fully, he sat down at the desk, pulled out the divorce papers that had been waiting for his signature. He read every line carefully. Then he signed, not with rage, not with sadness, with finality. The pen glided across the page like a blade. And when it was done, he exhaled, slow, steady, like a soldier leaving the battlefield with no victory, no peace, only scars. He looked out the window. The sun was rising. The world didn't care. Stock markets opened. Emails flooded. Cameras flashed somewhere in Manhattan. But Mark Harry, the billionaire who once built towers out of steel and ambition, had just watched the last piece of his heart collapse quietly into dust. He folded the papers, placed them in the envelope, sealed it, one last glance at the horizon, and then he walked out of the room. No goodbye, no hesitation, no second look, just footsteps echoing down a marble hall, each one carrying the weight of a man who had finally learned that even love can lie. Subscribe if you want to know if the divorce is the final end or the beginning of the truth. Comment below. Do you think Elena really betrayed him, or is there something deeper behind that deal? The world had moved on, or at least that's what the headline said. Harry Global rebounds. Billionaire Mark Harry restructures empire post-divorce. Moretti Group expands European real estate dominance. Enzo Moretti unstoppable. Once rivals, now rulers. The dynasties that defined the decade. The war was over, on paper. But in Mark Harry's chest, it still burned. 3 months had passed since the divorce. 3 months since the signature that felt like a funeral. 3 months since he buried the version of himself that believed in forever. The papers said he had recovered. His investors called it resilience. The media called it brilliance. Mark called it survival. He didn't rebuild Harry Global. He weaponized it. He cut unnecessary partnerships. He sold off the sentimental assets. He turned emotion into equity. The man who once built for legacy now built for dominance. Every new project carried a cold signature, efficiency over empathy. But no matter how high his profits soared, his nights remained silent. There were no calls from Positano, no late texts that said still awake, no soft laughter over dinner when he pretended to be serious. Just silence. And in that silence, he sometimes still saw her face. Elena, the woman who broke him, or so he believed, the woman he swore never forgive. But life, in Mark Harry's world, had a way of rewriting scripts you thought were final. It began with a call from Washington, an unfamiliar voice. Firm, polite, too polite. Mr. Harry, this is Agent Brooks, Department of Federal Trade Compliance. We'd like to schedule a conversation about your Dubai project filings. Mark leaned back in his chair, tone unreadable. Federal conversation or federal investigation? A pause. Then, that depends on what you know, sir. Click. The call ended. Mark sat there for a long time, staring at the Manhattan skyline. Federal Trade Compliance. Dubai project. He hadn't filed those contracts himself. They went through legal channels 2 years ago. The same channels Moretti had attacked. The same channels Elena had. He froze. He remembered something, small, insignificant at the time. The week before she disappeared, Elena had asked him quietly, Mark, if someone came after you, not in business, but in law, how far would you go to stop it? He had smiled then, thinking she was speaking hypothetically. He'd answered, as far as I need to. Now that sentence returned like a ghost, whispering from a place he had ignored. He opened his encrypted drive, the one no one else accessed. There, buried under folders, he found something he hadn't noticed before. A document, time-stamped the day before Elena vanished. Untitled. He clicked it open. Encrypted. Password required. His pulse quickened. He typed random guesses. Nothing. Then one thought hit him. Ridiculous, irrational, but worth trying. He typed Positano. Access granted. The file opened. Dozens of pages. Government correspondence. Emails between Moretti Group and federal agencies. And one subject line that made his hands tremble. Proposed investigation into Harry Global. Predicate for indictment. He scrolled further, and there it was. A letter, and signed, written by Elena Moretti. To whom it may concern. As of his correspondence, I have reason to believe certain parties within Moretti Group have fabricated evidence regarding Harry Global's Dubai operations to trigger a federal inquiry. I am prepared to provide internal documentation to prove falsification and obstruction. I take full responsibility for the transmission of proprietary information, and I am aware of the personal consequences. Mark stopped reading. The air in the room changed. She hadn't betrayed him. She had protected him by turning herself into the traitor, to stop a federal trap that could have ended his empire. Every piece clicked into place. Her meeting with her father, the documents, the smiles on the camera footage, the message for survival, not for love. She hadn't been saving herself. She'd been saving him. Mark stood up abruptly, pacing the office as if motion could undo the months of bitterness. He grabbed his phone, called every contact he had in Europe. He didn't care about discretion anymore. He just needed to find her. 2 days later, Zurich. He found her name on a private registry. New company. Small. Clean. Under the radar. Yem Holdings. When he walked into the building, a minimalist glass structure overlooking Lake Zurich, he felt a strange combination of dread and awe. He hadn't seen her in 93 days. But every day had replayed in his head like a silent film. The receptionist smiled politely. Do you have an appointment, sir? He didn't answer. He just said her name, Elena Moretti. The woman froze, then picked up the phone. Moments later, a voice echoed softly behind him. Still don't believe in appointments, do you? Mark turned, and there she was. Elena, composed, sharp, different, but still unmistakably her. She wore a white suit, hair pulled back, eyes steady, and yet softer. For a long moment, Neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick, with everything unspoken. Finally, she broke the silence. "You found the file." He nodded slowly. "I did." "Then you know why I left." Mark's voice was low, quiet, but charged. "You should have told me." Her eyes flickered. "I couldn't. If I did, you have tried to stop me. And if you stopped me, they would have buried you." He looked at her, really looked at her, and the weight of what she did began to sink in. "You took the hit," he said softly. "I had to make them believe I turned against you," she said. "It was the only way to kill the indictment before it started." Mark swallowed hard. The pain resurfaced, not from betrayal now, but from regret. He whispered, almost to himself, "I signed the divorce papers." She nodded. "I know. I asked for them." He frowned. "You what?" Elena took a deep breath. "I needed the separation to be legal. On record. If they saw we were still connected, they'd have targeted you again. The divorce wasn't the end, Mark. It was a shield." Mark exhaled, slow, unsteady. Months of fury, heartbreak, confusion, collapsing into clarity. He wanted to reach for her, but she stepped back, gently. Not rejection. Distance. A quiet understanding that some loves don't return the way they left. "Why didn't you come back?" he asked. Her gaze softened. "Because you rebuilt yourself. You became everything I always knew you could be, without needing me to hold you up. I didn't want to break that." He stared at her, silent, conflicted, love still alive, but trapped between pride and pain. Elena turned slightly toward the window, the Zurich skyline reflecting against the glass. "I didn't ask you here to reopen the past," she said quietly. "I asked you here to sign the future." She gestured to the table. 2 copies of a single contract lay open. Mark stepped closer. The title caught his eye. Harry plus Moretti Global Joint Development Entity Valuation for $0.8 billion USD. He looked at her, stunned. "You're merging the empires." She nodded, not for revenge, for redemption. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he smiled, faintly, bitterly, but with pride. "Even after everything." She met his gaze. "We were always stronger together, just not the way we thought." They both sat. No love confession. No tears. Just 2 signatures that rewrote history. As their pens hit the paper, the room fell silent, except for the soft sound of ink and inevitability. When it was done, Elena looked up. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Marriage broken. Love remained. Power won." Mark nodded slowly, eyes fixed on her like a man memorizing the last page of a book he didn't want to close. He stood. She stood. He extended his hand. She took it. No kiss. No reunion embrace. Just mutual respect between 2 survivors who had loved deeply, lost painfully, and rebuilt perfectly. As they walked toward the glass doors, sunlight streaming in across the marble floor, Mark turned to her one last time. Was it worth it? Elena's eyes glimmered, unreadable. "It was the only way we both survived." He smiled faintly. "Then I guess this is our happy ending." She shook her head. "No, Mark, this is our powerful one." And with that, the door slid open. 2 billionaires stepping out, no longer enemies, no longer lovers, but legends who rewrote what war and love could mean in their world. Subscribe and comment your country if you want more billionaire stories. Because every empire has a sequel, and not all love stories end, some evolve.